Discover Geography, Lesson 6-5, Sustainability. One of the big concerns about economic development, as we've tried to generate development in countries all around the world, is whether it's ecologically sustainable. The idea of sustainable development was put on the world agenda by a commission report in 1987 led by the former Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland. So it's sometimes called the Brundtland Report. This report defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. In other words, we don't want to generate wealth and improve material standard of living for people today if doing so is going to mean that future generations are unable to have that same high level of material standard of living because we've done things like overwhelm our environmental sinks with our waste and overuse our environmental resources. So the goal is to have development that can continue to maintain these material standards of living indefinitely into the future. This raises the question of whether sustainable development is really possible. The idea of sustainable development suggests that we can combine development, that is, improved material standards of living throughout the world, with sustainability, the ability to continue that way of life indefinitely into the future. And there are two directions in which the possibility of sustainable development has been criticized. On the one hand, we have what we might call the green critique. This is coming from radical environmentalists who argue that development can never be sustainable. That economic growth will always overuse the Earth's resources, will always bring about some sort of environmental catastrophe. So if we want to have sustainability, if we want to be able to maintain our way of life indefinitely, we have to give up on the idea of development. We have to give up on the idea of being materially wealthy all throughout the world. On the other hand, what we might call the libertarian critique suggests that making efforts to generate sustainability will inevitably compromise development. That is, we can't have development if we're going to try to be sustainable, because any efforts at sustainability are going to restrict the market. And only by letting the free market loose to do its thing will we ever really achieve true development. So we have some folks arguing for the possibility of sustainable development, other people suggesting reasons that it might not be possible. Which is correct? Well, it probably depends on case-to-case circumstances. In some cases, certain types of sustainable development may well be possible. Other types of sustainable development or other routes that claim to lead to sustainable development may fail for reasons described by either the green critique or the libertarian critique. In determining whether our activities are sustainable, we need to look at the impact that we're having on the natural environment, in particular the negative impacts that we're having. How much are we damaging the natural environment through our own activities? This is often represented through an equation called IPAT, or I equals P times A times T. This is another one of these conceptual equations that represents the relationships among phenomena, but it's not something that we can ever really put exact numbers into and calculate out. In this case, our impact on the natural environment is said to be a function first of population, the number of people we have. All else being equal, more people means more impact. If we have more people living the same lifestyle, it's going to demand more resources from the environment. It's going to generate more wastes. It's therefore going to have a much larger impact on the environment. A stands for affluence. Affluence is essentially average level of material consumption. How much stuff do we all have? Again, all else being equal, a higher level of affluence is going to generate a higher impact on the environment. If everyone has a bigger house, and more cars and more electronic devices, and eats more food or food higher on the food chain, that means more affluence, a higher material standard of consumption, but then that will also generate more impact on the environment because it takes more resources to create all those material goods. And it generates more waste to create them and to dispose of them when we're done with them. The final component is technology. Technology in this context refers to the efficiency by which we can take environmental resources and convert them into our material standard of living. So for a given level of affluence, how little resources can we manage to accomplish that with? So when technology improves by, for example, creating hybrid cars like you see in the picture there, we can do more with less resources. And so all else being equal, that will reduce our impact on the environment. There's a great deal of debate about the relative importance of these three components of the equation. Some people focus on population. They say the main reason that we have an unsustainable society is because we have too many people, and if we can control our population, that will be the biggest thing to solve our problems. Other people focus on affluence, that it's our level of material consumption, that we've got too much stuff, we need to cut back and live a simpler lifestyle in order to reduce our impact on the environment. And other people focus on technology. They say we can have lots of people and live a fancy, wealthy lifestyle if we have the right technology that can produce all of that with very little environmental impact. In any given case, you want to think about the potential impacts of all three of those components and try to weigh them to decide which ones are more important and therefore what kind of approaches might be the most useful if we feel that we need to reduce our impact on the natural environment. Now, IPAT captures a lot of what's going on, and it gives the framework for a lot of controversies that we have about our impacts on the environment, but it doesn't capture everything. One important thing that's left out of IPAT is the issue of inequality. Essentially, who is suffering from those impacts on the environment versus who is getting to enjoy the affluence that's generating that. In our interconnected global economy, what we often see is that the people that are causing the impact, the people whose consumption is generating these impacts, are in a different place from the people who are suffering from those environmental impacts. In the picture, you see a photo from a gold mine in Papua New Guinea. The gold that's being mined here is not mostly going to New Guineans. They're not getting any of that gold. They're not getting the benefits of that resource consumption. That gold is being sent to places like Australia or the United States to make jewelry and electronics and other products. So the affluence of the United States or Australia is generating an impact that's being felt in Papua New Guinea. Another way to look at our impact on the environment is the concept of an ecological footprint. The ecological footprint attempts to estimate how much environmental impact that may be occurring anywhere around the world does an individual's activities generate. The way you live your life is going to have some amount of impact on the world, and the size of that impact is your ecological footprint. We can see on this map the average ecological footprint per capita for different countries around the world. And we can see that the United States and Canada have two of the highest ecological footprints of any part of the world. People living in the United States, even people living what seems by US standards like a fairly frugal lifestyle, still have incredibly large ecological footprints. And if everyone in the world had the same ecological footprint as the typical American, it would require more resources than our one Earth contains in order to support those ways of life. So if we aim to bring economic development to the poor parts of the world, if we want to bring people in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America up to the same material standard of living as current Americans, that's going to present a problem if we don't find some way to do that using less resources. Calculating the exact ecological footprint of a particular individual is a notoriously difficult process. It's very difficult to document not just what resources and sinks a particular person is using, but to convert all of those into some sort of common denominator so that we can get a total ecological footprint number for somebody. In the rest of this video, I'm going to walk through one ecological footprint calculator that exists on the internet. This one is provided by the website myfootprint.org. I'm not using this calculator because it's necessarily exactly correct in all of its estimations, but just because it's a simple and easy to understand one that will help you see some of the types of things that go into a person's ecological footprint, even if the exact numbers that are generated through this site may not be entirely reliable. And I encourage you to check out your own ecological footprint through this calculator or others. If you just go on Google, you can find a number of different ecological footprint calculators that weigh different things in different amounts, that ask you for different sorts of information to make their estimates based on, just to get an idea of where your own ecological footprint stands. So in this calculator, I'm going to tell them that I live in the United States. I'm going to use the US measurement system. There are 2 people in my household, myself and my wife. Our combined income is about $60,000 or so, and I'm not going to join their mailing list right now. I've used this calculator a lot of times, so I don't need to keep joining their mailing list. Now you'll notice at the top of the screen there, you see a running tally of my ecological footprint. So pay attention to that as I click on different options to see how different aspects of the ecological footprint affect that total. Some things will have a giant impact, some things will have much less impact. So my climate is a temperate climate like New York. My home is an apartment with 3 small bedrooms, so you can see my footprint went down somewhat. Energy sources in my home are electricity and natural gas. We pay for green power. I think we're about 90% green power for our house. For travel, I commute quite a distance to Slippery Rock every day during the school year, and so I'm guessing that I'm about 13,000 total miles of travel by car each year. And then each year I'll usually fly to one academic conference, so I'm going to guess, based on the different locations these are located, maybe an average of 3,000 miles worth of air travel, and I don't travel too much by bus or rail consistently. The vehicle I drive is a mid-size 4-door car, and I no longer share rides with one other person. I used to be able to carpool with one of my colleagues at Slippery Rock, but he was on a temp position and that ended, so I've been driving by myself recently. So the energy saving features in my home, we use compact fluorescent bulbs. We do not have any of these other features. Most of those would require us to be able to install things in my apartment that we can't do since it's a rental. Energy saving habits, we turn off the light, we use power strips, tend to turn off our computers, try to keep the thermostat low, unplug small appliances, and we have no real yard, so we're definitely making minimal use of power equipment and landscaping. Home is located in the inner city. I live in the north side of Pittsburgh, and I've not purchased offsets for carbon emissions. Go to the next page. What best describes my diet? My wife and myself are essentially vegan in our diet, so if you watch the overall footprint at the top there, you can see the huge impact that it makes switching from the default omnivore diet that they give here down to vegan diet, and if you look at the impact that going to the top of the food chain, eating a mostly meat diet would make. And that makes a pretty big difference. I'm actually going to check vegetarian here because we have several cats, and our cats are definitely not vegans. So the vegetarian makes kind of a compromise that we're eating just plants, but the cats are eating meat. Where do we obtain most of our food? Supermarkets for some items, and then natural food stores, by which I'll count things like the East End Food Co-op here in Pittsburgh for others, so that's about right. How often do we select foods that are certified organic? Sometimes. That sounds about right. How much we normally eat? 2 large meals and some smaller. Sounds about right. And we don't have a garden of our own. Click on next, which best describes our home, a house with, in our case, 3 units in it. The house was not, to my knowledge, built with recycled materials. It's a pretty old house. Home furnishings, almost all of our home furnishings are secondhand from garage sales and Craigslist, etc. Water saving features, we don't have any of those particular things installed in our house. Water saving habits, we don't compost. We unfortunately don't minimize shower time. We do run our dryers only when full. We rarely wash our cars. We do look for leaks. And we don't have a deck, so we're not able to hose that down. And we sometimes use biodegradable or non-toxic cleaning products. Spending habits, we live within our means. We tend to use things until we genuinely need to replace them. We fill usually 1, maybe 1.5 garbage bins per week, and we recycle almost all of our paper, aluminum, glass, plastic, some of our electronics. And we sometimes buy clothing made with recycled materials. And so here's the result. According to this particular calculator, which again, different calculators might give you slightly different results depending on what questions they ask, what assumptions they make about what level of resource use is implied by a certain answer. According to this, if everyone in the world lived my way of life, if everyone had the same lifestyle as I did, it would take slightly over 4 Earths to provide all of the resources and sinks to support that way of life. We obviously don't have 4 Earths to work with, so that suggests that if we want development to continue, if we want to be able to raise the material standard of living of people in the poorer parts of the world, we need to find a way to make that material standard of living more sustainable. We need to find a way to make it consume less of the Earth's resources. And to finish, we can look at this breakdown here by consumption category, and you can see how I compare to the average for the United States. It looks like I'm below average in just about every category here. And the carbon footprint, the amount of carbon dioxide emissions that we generate, is clearly the highest category both for Americans in general and for myself. And so that's a good thing to keep in mind as we move into our next lesson on climate change.